Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Jasween Kaur and I am from University Business School, Guru Nanak Dev University, Amritsar. Today we are going to talk on the module Customer Expectation and Perception of Services from paper Services Marketing. So students, let us see what we are going to learn from this module. To understand expectation and satisfaction of service customers, to study the customer expectation is important to know the level of services derived by consumers. In today's competitive world, customer perception and customer satisfaction is a key ingredient to success of a business firm. Introduction. Service expectations we're going to talk in this introduction. Expectations are formed during the research and decision-making process, and they are heavily shaped by information search and evaluation of attributes. Expectations change over time, and they are influenced by supplier control factors. Expectations are reference points against which service delivery is compared. The level of expectation varies from type of reference points customers hold. Customer service is all about expectations. Service is thus praised or criticized because of expectations. Possible levels of customer expectation. There are two aspects which needs to be discussed in this level of slide. One is the high level and other is the low level. At the high end, we have idle expectations or desires, followed by normative, that is the expectations which should be there for the customer, then the experience-based norms, then the acceptable expectations, and at the lowest level we have the minimum tolerable expectations. To understand this better, we'll have a discussion on this. How do customers develop expectations? Consumers have different type of expectations from a service. The knowledge of customer expectation helps marketers design comprehensive service packages capable of delivering satisfaction. Companies should meet all customer expectations to survive in the competitive environment. Now, when we talk about expectations, there are various types of expectations. The range is from desired to the adequate level, and we have zone of tolerance. We all know what is zone of tolerance. Zone of tolerance is the difference between what the customer wants and what the customer is given. At the high level, we have the most highest level of desired expectation, and at the adequate service expectation, we have what is given to the customer. If this adequate service matches with his perception or the experience, the customer is satisfied. If the customer gets less than what he expected at the adequate service level, he is dissatisfied. And if the customer gets, sometimes it happens that the customer gets more than what is expected, then the customer has a situation of delight. There are various factors which may influence the desired service and the adequate service. We'll be taking all these factors one by one. First level is the desired service. The type of service which customers hope to receive is termed as desired service. It's a wished for level, a combination of what customers believe can and should be delivered in the context of their personal needs. Second factor is the adequate service. The minimum level of service a customers will expect or they will accept without being dissatisfied. Difference between desired and adequate service expectation is also known as zone of tolerance, as I discussed with you. Factors that influence customer expectations of service. Now we'll be discussing in this various sources of desired service expectations. In this, the first point is personal needs. Personal needs are those states or conditions essential to the physical or psychological well-being of the customer and are pivotal factors that shape what customers desire in service. Personal needs can fall into many categories, including physical, psychological, social, and functional. A customer with high social and dependency needs may have relatively higher expectation for hotel ancillary services, hoping for better services. The second point is personal services philosophy. A customer's expectations are also affected by his personal philosophy concerning the delivery of service of the customer. Some consumers by nature have high standards concerning the quality of service delivery and have very little importance or tolerance for deviation. Other consumers have lower standards and tend to be more tolerant of service deviant. Individuals showing delivery their service philosophy through a combination of two inputs, hereditary and past experience, and combination of these two will determine the personal urgency or need of the customer. Now the third point is derived service expectations. The influence of actions where customer expectations are driven by other persons or group of people. A niece from a big family, we have an example to quote here, that a niece from a big family who is planning a 90th birthday for a favorite aunt is representing an entire family in selecting a restaurant for celebration. Her needs are driven in part by expectations derived from the other family members, because the consultation of the decision of other family members needs to be taken into account for selection of a restaurant for celebration of the event. The second category of sources of adequate service expectations. It has three factors which influence adequate service. The first is perceived service alternatives. These alternatives are other providers from whom the customers can obtain the service. If the customers believe they have multiple service providers to choose from, or if they can provide the service for themselves, their levels of adequate service are higher than those of customers who believe it is not possible to get better service elsewhere. The customer's perception that service alternatives exist raises the level of adequate service. That means if there is a lot of competition available around and customer can choose other kind of services, naturally the customer expectation from that particular service will be higher and vice versa. The second factor is situational factors. Customer expectations of services are affected by various situational factors as reason for the purchase, the customer mood, the weather, time constraints, and whether the service is emergency. One of the type of situational factor is uncontrollable situational factors, which include service performance conditions that customer view as beyond the control of service provider. Other type of situational factor is personal situational factor, which consists of short-term individual factors that make a customer aware of need for service. Next factor is predicted service. It is the level of service that customers believe that they are likely to get. If customers predict good service, the level of adequate service are likely to be higher than if they predict poor service. It is typically an estimate or calculation of the service that a customer will receive in an individual transaction rather than an overall relationship with the service provider. Now, the next source of both derived and predicted service expectations we'll be discussing in this slide. There are four factors that influence both desired and predicted service expectations, which are as follows. The first is explicit service promises. Now, as the name says, what does explicit means? It means that these are the personal and non-personal statements about the service made by the organization to the customer. Statements are personal when they are communicated by a firm's salespeople, that is the internal level. They are non-personal when they come from companies' web pages, brochures, and other written publications, that means from various external sources. So we have a combination of internal and external sources. The second factor means implicit service promises. These are service-related cues that lead to inferences about what the service should be and will be. These quality cues are dominated by price and tangibles associated with the service. The next factor is word-of-mouth communication. It is the strongest source of information used by consumers informing in various expectations and experiences. The consumers will often seek the opinion of others before purchasing a service. So word of mouth is important in building the reputation and expectation of the customer from the service which will consumer will have knowledge or experience. This communication can be used to establish the desired and ideal level of service. The next factor is past experience. The most important factor affecting customer expectation of a service is customer's past experience vis-a-vis the service they have already experienced or chosen or bought. It includes with this particular service vendor experience with other vendor written in the same industry or within the same industrial peripherals and experience with the related service. Now to understand this better, we'll take an example. For example, you probably compare each stay in a particular hotel with all the stays in that hotel which you have already used earlier. But past experience with a local hotel is likely to be very limited view of your past experience. You may also compare each stay with your experience in other hotels and hotel charges. Strategies used by service marketers to influence customer expectation. First, we are going to discuss the possible influencing strategies for each factor influencing the customer expectation. First is explicit service promises. The first possible influencing strategy is make realistic and accurate promises that reflect the service actually delivered rather than an idealized version of the service. Second strategy, ask contact people for feedback on the accuracy of promises made in advertising and personal selling. Third, formalize service promises through a service guarantee that focuses company employees on the promise and that provides feedback on the number of times promises are not fulfilled. The second factor is implicit service promises. There are two levels of influencing strategies in this. First is ensure that service tangibles accurately reflect the type and level of service provided. The second is ensure that price premiums can be justified by higher levels of performance by the company on important customer attributes. The third factor is lasting service intensifiers. Now there are again two possible influencing strategies for lasting service intensifiers. First is use market research to determine sources of derived service expectations and their requirements. Second is use market research to profile personal service philosophies of customers and use this information in designing and delivering services. Next factor is personal needs. Now, it is very important to understand and educate customers on ways the service addresses their needs because we need to customize our services according to the customer need and requirement. Next factor is temporary service intensifiers. This increases service delivery during peak periods or in emergencies. It is a combination of customer demand and service. If customer demand is more, we increase the service delivery hours and vice versa. The next factor is perceived service alternative. We should be fully aware of competitive offerings and where possible appropriate match them so that we can survive in the competitive environment and innovate our offerings or service delivery inputs to match with the competition. The next factor is self-perceived service role. The possible influencing strategy for this in order to build up customer expectation and perception is to educate customers to understand their roles and perform them well. Sometimes we are in the environment where we are using self-service technologies where customers are involved in the co-creation or production of the service. So here customer role become very important and need of educating customers how they can participate in the interactive stage with the service provider so that the service takers, that is the customers, can achieve the service delivery in quality standards and up to the expectation. The next factor is word of mouth communication. We need to stimulate word of mouth in advertising by using testimonials and opinion leaders. Another important strategy for this is use incentives with existing customers to encourage them to say positive things about the service. We can use various examples like we have loyalty membership cards, or we can give certain discounts to our customers who are loyal customers so that they feel related to the organization, they feel they belong to the organization, and of course they will give positive feedback to the new customers and will lead to higher new customer expectation and attraction. Next factor is past experience. We know past experience of the customer vis-a-vis a service will build up and customer expectation. We can use marketing research to profile customers' previous experience with similar services. If customer has a positive past experience with the service, then the customer's expectation towards the service will be higher. Next factor is the situational factor. We can use service guarantees to assure customers about service recovery regardless of the situational factors that occur. We need to give assurance to the customer that in case of any repair required or any kind of delivery with the service failure, in case of service failures, the service guarantees are there to give them the service according to the customer requirement. The last factor is the predicted service. Here we tell the customers when service provision is higher than what can be normally be expected. Customer perception. Now we have already discussed customer expectation in a previous understanding of this topic. Now in order to compare our expectation with the perception, it is necessary to understand what customer expectation is and how service marketers define customer perception. Service marketers must find out whether customers are satisfied with the quality of service. The evaluation of service differs from person to person, culture to culture, and situation to situation. So there are various important factors that influence service perception of customers, which we'll be discussing them in different ways. Service encounters. Service encounter is moment of truth. That means at this stage there is a direct interaction of the service provider with the service customer, that is a service taker. So service encounters are called as moment of truth. Service encounter is a situation where the customer interacts with service providers. The most important impression of service occurs to customer in the service encounter. For example, behavior of service contact employee, service processes, quality of service, and service environment will influence the image of the service in the eyes of the customer. There are three types of encounters. First is remote encounters, second is technology mediated encounters, and third is face-to-face encounters. Evidence of service. The evidence of service is another major factor that influences customers' perceptions. The intangible nature of a service creates doubts in a mind of customers so that they search for evidence of their interactions with organizations. For example, when the customer deposits money in the bank, they find the evidence of the transaction even from the receipt and password entry or access to online verification of deposit. Image. The image of an organization influences the perception of customers. It communicates expectation. Positive image makes people more open to favorable word of mouth communication. Price. Price is another important factor because consumers frequently rely on price as an indicator to develop expectations and perceptions of service because services are intangible. Generally, a high price indicates a high expectation and a low price indicates low quality offerings. Thus, the service quality expectations of economy class passengers of air transport services will differ significantly from that of business class passengers. So, these were the factors which will influence the customer perception. That means when the customers are getting the service, and the factors like evidence of service, service encounter, how the service provider is dealing with the customer, and how the image of the company or the service organization is being built up in the eyes of the customer, and the competitive price which the service provider is keeping will influence the experiential effect of the service in the eyes of the customer. Now, when we talk about customer experience or customer perception and we compare with customer expectation, we need to understand the concept of customer satisfaction because ultimately there are three levels in the model of customer expectation and perception, as I discussed previous also. The first level is if the customer expectation is equal to customer perception, then the customer will be satisfied. If the customer expectation is less than the customer perception, then the customer will have a situation of customer delight. But normally, if the customer expectation is higher than the customer perception, and we see it in around us due to competition and various levels of service failure, if it happens, then the customer will be dissatisfied. Nowadays, most of the companies try to reduce customer dissatisfaction and try to achieve customer satisfaction or sometimes customer delight by giving various innovative inputs to their service, or maybe personalizing or customizing their service. We discussed customer expectation and we discussed customer perception. Now these parameters have to be discussed in combination or in their reference to understand customer satisfaction, because if expectation is equal to perception, the customer is likely to be satisfied. So what is customer satisfaction? Various theorists have defined customer satisfaction in different ways. To sum up, we can say customer satisfaction is defined as number of customers or percentage of total customers who reported experience with a firm, its products or the service exceeds the standards and the goals of specification. Satisfaction is customer's fulfillment response. Customer satisfaction is important because it provides marketers and business owners with a metric that they can use to manage and improve their businesses. Customer satisfaction is based on the customer's perception of the service. The determinants of customer satisfaction. The first factor says product and service features. Customer satisfaction with the product or service is influenced significantly by the customer evaluation of product or service feature. For a service such as a resort hotel, important features might include the pool area, restaurants, room comfort and privacy, the helpfulness and courtesy of staff, and room price. That means if you want to book a service resort or a service hotel in the feature of a resort, these factors, these features will be expected by the customer that he should be having in the hotel. And if he does not get it, then the customer satisfaction is likely to be low. Most firms determine through some means what important features and attributes are there for the service area. The second factor of customer satisfaction is customers' emotions. Customers' emotions can also affect their perception of satisfaction with products and services. These emotions can be stable, pre-existing emotions. Specific emotions may be induced by the customer experience itself, influencing a customer's satisfaction with the service. The next factor is attributions for service success or failure. Attributions, the perceived cause of events, influence perception of satisfaction as well. When customers have been surprised by the outcome, they tend to look for reasons, and the assessments of the reasons can influence the satisfaction. Perceptions of equity or fairness. Customer satisfaction is also influenced by equity and fairness. Customers ask themselves, have they been treated fairly with other customers? Notions of fairness are central to customers' perceptions of satisfaction with the products and services. So the service providers are trained to deal with the customers equally, whether he is your high net worth customer or your low net worth customer. Next factor is other customers, family members and co-workers, in addition to product and service features and one's own feelings and beliefs. Customer satisfaction is also influenced by other people. That means suppose we have to decide on a vacation destination, we're not only making our own decision, but we take other inputs from family. So family decisions are influencing the customer's destinations. One of the important aspects when we discussed customer expectation and perception is determining service quality. You must have heard about the concept of SERQUAL, that is the service quality instrument used for measuring the quality of service delivered by the service provider to service taker. SERQUAL is a quantitative instrument used for measuring the quality of service in the eyes of the customer. Service quality is a critical element of customer perception. Quality means conformation to standards and fitness to use. Service quality dimensions have a range, and customers do not perceive quality in a unidimensional way, but rather judge quality based on multiple factors. The dimensions represent how customers organize information about service quality in their minds. The dimensions are also applicable to retail and business services. There are 5 dimensions given by Parasuraman, Zithwal and Berry in determining service quality under the SERQUAL model. First is reliability. Reliability means delivering on promise. It is defined as ability to perform promised service dependably and accurately. Customers want to do business with companies that keep their promises, particularly their promises about their service outcomes and core service attributes. The second dimension is responsiveness, which means being willing to help. Responsiveness is the willingness to help customers and to provide prompt service delivery. This dimension emphasizes attentiveness and promptness in dealing with customer requests, questions, complaints, and problems. Assurance. This is the third dimension in SERQUAL in judging service quality, which means inspiring trust and confidence. Assurance is defined as employees' knowledge and courtesy, an ability of the firm and its employee to inspire customer trust and confidence. This dimension is more important for services that customers perceive as high risk. Fourth dimension is empathy, that is treating customers as individuals. Empathy is defined as the caring and individualized attention that firm provides to its customers. The essence of empathy is conveying through personalized service that customers are unique and special needs are being understood. Tangibles. Representing service physically is important because service is an intangible. Service is inconsistent. Service is heterogeneous. Service has no inventory. So because of these characteristics of service, they need to be tangibilized to given a physical appearance or physical identity. So tangibles are defined as the appearance of physical facilities, equipment, personal and communication materials. Tangibles provide physical representation or images of the service that customers, particularly new customers, will use to evaluate quality. So all these 5 dimensions of service quality model will influence the customer perception and judging the service in the eyes of the customer. Now, in order to understand service quality, we need to understand what are the various instruments and parameters which measure service quality. One of the instruments to measure service quality in modular forms is the model or the gap model of service quality. To evaluate the quality of service, customers will compare the service they receive with the service they expected. The gap model of quality defines various gaps, their causes, their proposed strategies to fulfill them, such that the consistent delivery of goods service quality is made positive to the customer so as to match their expectations. So the gaps will not be there if customer expectations match their perception. The model of gap, which is also known as gap model, identifies following types of gap. Gap 1, knowledge gap. It is a difference between what customer expect from a service and what management believes customer expect from the service. This gap occurs due to provision of wrong facilities, hiring of wrong staff, and wrong training. To close this gap, it requires a detailed knowledge of what customer desired, and then a response is to be built through service operating system. The second gap is known as standards gap. It is a difference between management perception of customer expectation of service and service quality specifications. In gap 1, we understood that there was a difference between management perception of customer expectation. But in the second gap, if the management realizes what customer expects but does not specify to its service provider, then this gap occurs. So this situation can be caused by 3 factors such as resource constraints, market conditions, or management indifference. To reduce this gap, service firms must have the commitment of top management so that they specify to their service providers, that is the frontline employees, what they have to give it to the customer and how much has to be given and where has to be given. The third gap is known as delivery gap. It is a difference between service quality specifications for the service and delivery of those specifications by the service provider. Primary causes of this group are the variable nature of services. To reduce this gap, teamwork should be created in organization, because even if the management specifies to the service provider what they have to deliver and also set TATs, that is a turnaround time, it is the service provider's capability, efficiency which determines the service delivery. So it is important that the delivery gap should not be there in determining the quality of service. The fourth gap is the communication gap. It is the difference between the service that was delivering and the external communication of the firm. If the companies set up huge promises in the advertising, but at the time of delivery, if they are not able to deliver, this will create the communication gap. So normally communication gap is influenced by the overprice or overpromise and horizontal communication. To reduce this gap, there must be communication between the salespeople and personnel performing the service. And all these 4 gaps should be reduced in the last stage, which is at the end of the customer, because all these effective service deliveries at all these 4 stages will deliver the service to the customer and build up his experience. And if the customer experience matches with his expectation, there will be no gap. So these 4 gaps needs to be effectively dealt with in reducing the 5th gap in service delivery, that is So students, now let us summarize what we have learned in this module. The study of customer expectation is important to know the level of service desired by consumers. Customers hold different types of service expectations. These different levels of service are reflected within the customer's zone of tolerance, which establishes the variability in the service delivery that the customer is willing to accept. As we understood in a previous module and discussion, that zone of tolerance is a subjective concept. It varies from person to person. For the same person, it varies from time to time. So, the service marketers need to understand the zone of tolerance for their particular service, because same service does not have the same of zone of tolerance by the customers. It is situation specific and time specific. So, the service marketers should market their service product according to the parameters of zone of tolerance so that the customer expectations are met by their perception and experiences. Customer perception of service are described through two important and critical concepts. One is customer satisfaction and second is service quality. The critical perception is discussed in terms of factors that influence each of them, because it is the service quality and its delivery according to the standards which will help in building the satisfaction of the customer.